Okay, so here we are, and Lynn Johnston. I know you as a really nice person and an excellent editor, but can you introduce yourself more in detail and talk a little about how you got started as a writing coach, for instance?
Yeah, I am a writing coach. I'm also an author. The way I got started as a writing coach, I didn't actually intend to do that. I created a bunch of tools for myself as I was learning to write fiction because I found that I had difficulty going from theory to application. And it was like I had the ideas and I had all the concepts of writing fiction, but then when I would try and apply it to my own stories, it didn't, the concepts were not making my stories better. So I went and created a lot of workshops and a lot of worksheets and a lot of tools. And then eventually I had so many of these tools, I thought, well, maybe I could teach a class. I wonder if anybody will want to learn this. Maybe not. Maybe this stuff only works for me. But I had an opportunity to teach through a Romance Writers Association workshop. I was a member of one of their chapters. And I taught a class on the tools that I created for editing. And at the end of the class, I had about five students who basically said, "Hey, I would like you to mentor me one on one. I'd like to get more in depth help editing my stories."
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Oh, that's really sweet. Thank you guys so much. I take that as a real compliment. But I don't think I'm good enough to do that."
Okay.
And so then they asked me again.
So you had to.
It took me a little while to make to have the confidence to say yes to that. But once I started working with people one on one, I actually discovered that I love that. I love sitting down with someone who's got a story where they've got the bare bones of the idea and they've got these great characters, but they just don't know how to turn it into the story that's in their head.
Mm.
And I love helping people get that story out of their heads and onto the page.
Great, and I love working with you, helping me with my story. That's for sure.
Oh, thank you.
Um, One of my biggest problem is going from idea to a finished plot with a beginning and middle and end. Can you talk about how you help your clients do that?
Yes. And actually, I think that it's kind of interesting that people are always asking writers, where do you get your ideas? Because the assumption is kind of like if you have an idea for a story, you have a story. And that's very much not the case.
No.
The majority of writing, a huge part of it is actually taking that idea and using a lot of different techniques to develop it. So it's not enough to know, I want to write a story about a Highlander, or I want to write a story about a mermaid, or I want to write a story about two people falling in love in the Old West. That's an idea.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole bunch of brainstorming you have to do to get to a plot. And most people think that once they get the idea, they should just go, oh, next step plot.
Yeah, I
When
know.
really it's like, no, next step is like, let's think about the implications of your idea.
Mm-hmm.
Let's think about what kinds of characters would actually fit into that idea. Let's think about what kind of story you could tell with that idea, because you could tell so many different stories if you start with two people falling in love in the Old West.
Mm-hmm.
It could be a murder mystery, it could be a thriller, it could be just a straightforward romance. You could have like supernatural elements and make it like a magical realism kind of story. If you skip over those brainstorming steps, where you've really thought about which direction you want to take it and why you want to tell the story, it's really easy to get stuck.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess my short answer to that is there's so many different tools, and you have to kind of start looking at your idea and saying, okay, which of these tools is going to help me figure out the way I want to go in my story.
Okay, and you help your clients do that.
Yes,
Nice.
I try and start with, what do you want to tell the world with this story?
Mm.
And once we've talked about like why you care about the story and why it's important to you, a lot of times that makes it really obvious where you need to start. because either you have a character you're in love with, or you'll have a theme that's really important to you, or you'll have, even if it's just like an image sometimes just having an image of two people in a tableau sitting on a train, and you start digging into that image and say, okay, what is the symbolism of the train? What is the symbolism of the things that you're seeing in this image? And that will tell you what you need to do to develop the story next.
Okay. So what is the minimum a writer needs to figure out in order to start writing? I mean,
that actually varies a lot per writer. I'm sure you've heard the terms pantser versus plotter.
yes, exactly.
And I'm a hardcore plotter. I have to know everything.
Mm-hmm.
I'm one of those people that I need to like think it through, and I have to think it through on paper too. I can't just think out loud. I have to write it down and see it, so that I've actually read what I've written, and it's only after I read what I've written that I'm like, okay, that's the story I'm writing.
Okay.
But I have a lot of clients who are on the other end of the spectrum. They're pantsers.
Okay.
And so actually that's been kind of a challenge for me, is trying to help people who delegate a lot of that decision making to their subconscious, trying to help them figure out how to bring it up from their subconscious without interrupting the process. Because you pantsers have a different process than us plotters. And a lot of it is subconscious. And it's happening like at the back of your head. And if you do something that interrupts that, then you get stuck.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little bit of a delicate process. But for example, I have one client who's a pantser, and basically she needs to know what her characters want, and that's it.
Okay.
That's like, once she knows what their goal is, she is off and running, and she can write a 70,000 word draft in a month. Whereas yeah, I know. And if you started me with, your character wants to be a jockey, go,
Yeah.
I would be like, I'm never going to write that.
Right.
So it really just depends. And I think actually part of developing yourself as a writer is figuring that out, really. It's like a lot of times, I know when I started, I thought I would be able to sit down at the computer with a blank page and just write a story.
Yeah.
And then I discovered...
glass of white wine and
Exactly! And then I discovered, oh, wait, I can't do anything until I know this. Right. And then I would start writing with that and get stuck. And I'd be like, oh, the reason I'm stuck is because I forgot to figure out what my hero wants. And so I just kept building up a list over time, every time I got stuck, of what it was I hadn't figured out in advance. Okay. And that's where my brainstorming comes from. And I try to help my clients do that too.
Good idea. So I guess my next question is it possible to get stuck if you're writing with a plot outline?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And there's a lot of different reasons that can happen. It could be that when you had the plot outline, you had one vision of the story, but as you write, the more engaged you are in your story, the more likely you are to get awesome ideas about how it could be better. And the more awesome ideas you get about how it could be better, the more likely you are to diverge from that plot outline. So, it could be that you've got a bunch of great new ideas and you start to take the story off in a new direction, and then you get stuck because you don't have the outline for the new direction, but the outline for the old direction doesn't apply anymore.
Yeah.
It could be that I have clients who try outlining and get stuck because it's just too much for them to keep in mind all at once. They are more organic writers, they're pantsers, so they're trying to give themselves so much structure that it kind of stifles them. And again, it goes kind of back to that balance. So it could be, if you're stuck with an outline, especially, well, okay, there's a third reason. If somebody else gave you the outline and you haven't figured out how to dovetail your character's motivations into the outline, that's the third reason I see people get stuck, is because they have these events that the outline says are going to happen, but they haven't figured out why their characters are motivated to do those things. And so then it doesn't feel right when you're writing it, because it doesn't feel like it's naturally arising from the character's desires. It feels like you're imposing the action on the characters.
Yes, of course. So what do you do when you get stuck?
Well, it depends on why I'm stuck. But the number one first thing I do is I always try and step back and look at it, take a deep breath, try and get a little bit of distance from why I'm stuck, and say, okay, is this just an I'm having a bad day? Because sometimes that's it. It's like things happen. Your husband is having a stressful time at work and vented at you, and you're kind of like trying to help him, or you've got a sick child, or something else is going on. It's just like, okay, too much of your energy is going to that, and you just need to take a day. But when I get stuck and I know it's a story problem, the first thing I do is I try to describe the problem.
How do I describe it? In writing or just...
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, in writing. I try and say, the reason I'm having this problem is, and I try and just write down, my character wants this, but it doesn't feel right to do that, and I wanted this to happen, or whatever the problem is as I see it. And then I email it to one of my writing partners.
Okay.
And then I go do something else for half an hour. Like house cleaning or something that's physical, so that my subconscious can be thinking about the problem as I've defined it while I'm doing something else. And that's a really common technique. It's called incubation.
Okay.
Thomas Edison and a lot of other great thinkers use incubation, where you tackle a problem by defining it very clearly. And then you, once you've defined it very clearly and done everything you can to be sure that you understand the problem as well as you can, you go away, you do something else. That idea is still going to be chewed on by your subconscious while you're doing something else. And that's how you get that idea that comes to you like an hour later or the next day, where you're like, Eureka, I know why that's not working.
Okay. I think that's what Stephen King calls asking the guys in the basement for help.
Yes, I think, yes, Stephen King and Nora Roberts both do that.
Okay, yes. So do you have the answer to your problems normally before your writing partner comes back to you, or how does it work?
It really depends.
Okay.
Sometimes my writing partners just nail it. I'll get an email back 15 minutes later and it'll be like, well, it seems really obvious that this should happen, right? And other times they're like, gosh, I don't know, and we'll talk more about it, and I'll have to go sleep on it. It's pretty rare that I get stuck for more than a couple of days, just between that active incubation and thinking about it. One of the other tricks that I use, if incubation didn't work immediately and my writing partner didn't immediately help me out there, is to sit down and look at the scene, and I'll ask myself a couple questions. I'll ask myself, what is the purpose of the scene? I'll ask myself, what do I want? How do I want to move the story forward with the scene? What do I want to communicate to the reader with this scene? And several other questions along that line in terms of what the scene is trying to accomplish. Because a lot of the time when I get stuck, it's because the scene has to do one thing in terms of the function of the story, and I'm not really accomplishing that. And that's how you get scenes that are stagnant. It's like, you have to escalate the conflict, or you have to set up something so that 3 chapters later this other thing is going to make sense that you want to happen. You don't want the reader to be like, hey, that came out of left field.
Yeah.
But if you're not doing that right, it's like you can get stuck without realizing why.
Well, that's a good one. Very good tip. Okay. So I know that some of my subscribers and myself too have had the problem that we had a great idea, or an idea that we thought were great, and we might even have a middle and an ending, and so we knew where the story would go, but we had no idea how to fill in all the blanks, sort of. I mean, how do you do it? Can you give a short explanation on that?
Short explanation. There are a lot of different things that you can do. If you're more of a plotter and more structure oriented, looking at your plot points, if you know what your major plot points are, your first plot point, your first pinch point, your midpoint, etc. If you look at those and say, okay, I know what big dramatic thing I want to happen at these major points of the story, you can start looking at like, okay, what are all the small things that have to happen to set that up? And then what's the aftermath? What are all the different implications after that event happens? And that will help you generate some of those. The other thing that I strongly recommend doing is looking at your conflicts. A lot of the times if you're having trouble filling in the middle of your story, it's because the initial conflicts that you set up either aren't big enough in terms of the implications for the characters, or you don't have enough conflicts to carry them through the story. For example, you might need to set up some secondary conflicts. Like maybe your main character's goal is to rob a bank, but you're finding that the middle drags because it's all preparation for robbing the bank. So you want to say, okay, what other conflicts? Can she not get along with her partner? Can she almost get caught by the police? Can she fall in love with a policeman? Can she be having some sort of other thing related to her internal conflict that is making this more complicated? Is she robbing the bank because she wants to impress her long lost father who abandoned her when she was 5?
Okay.
Just really digging into all of the conflicts and maybe creating some extra conflicts that will help generate those middle scenes and keep the reader engaged in the character's life without having it just be the filler of like, okay, let's just work out every detail of a bank robbery and that's my middle.
Yeah, and that would be very boring to read. So okay.
Yes.
Great tip. I love it. So I understand you're going to be teaching a live workshop around Ryan Leonard's upcoming product, 25-minute fiction system. I've used this system to write a novella, and I found that I used to type pretty fast myself, but and I used a little bit of a similar system, but Ryan kept telling me to try his system, so I did, and it improved my writing speed really with a huge amount. But what can you tell me about the live course that I'm really looking forward to? What are you going to do there?
Before I answer that, do you mind if I ask you, like, what do you think was the most interesting thing about your experience with Ryan's class in terms of how it was different from the way you usually write?
What was different? Now he's writing in 25 minutes cycles. And I've done that, I've worked with that on other things, but when I wrote fiction, I used 45-minute cycles. And during that time, I could normally write one scene, so I would stop there. It's like, okay, job done, and do something else. But with the 25-minute cycles, I couldn't write a full scene in 25 minutes. So I would take a break and start on the next scene, and that would actually, it would put me more into the zone that I have to write for a longer fiction for a longer period. So I would write maybe 2-3 scenes during that period instead. So I think that was what made the big difference.
I think a lot of people are going to have that experience. Like 25 minutes is enough to get you in the groove, but it's not enough to wear you out. And then having those little tiny physical breaks in there, like boosts your energy so that it's easier to keep going.
Exactly.
So talking about the live class, I am both super excited and slightly terrified because I've never done anything like this before. I've taught a lot of writing classes, but I've never taught a writing class where I am writing in front of the class. I'm actually going to write a novella with you guys. I'm going to lead you through brainstorming, starting from zero with no idea whatsoever. We're going to build a complete plot outline using Ryan's outline. And
And that's,
I'm going to add...
that's part of the product, right? That
It is.
Yes. The what did he call it? The something about
universal
plot
creator.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Okay, great.
Yes, we're going to use that plot creator to generate a plot. I'm going to give you a lot of extra exercises for brainstorming your characters to help you really flesh them out before you get started. And then we are actually going to write together in 14 days. You're going to write a couple scenes. I'm going to write a couple scenes. I'm actually going to post my scenes I'm going to give you a video where I walk through my scenes and I actually tell you what my reasoning was for everything that's in the scene. So you're going to actually get to look over my shoulder for the entire writing process. You're going to be able to ask me any questions. We're going to do a hot seat where you're going to be able to send in your first scene or two and get feedback on it. And we'll talk about, sorry, drawing a blank here. Yeah. We'll talk about a little bit of editing. Once we get the entire draft done in 14 days, we'll talk a little bit about what you want to do next. It's editing a novella, even though it's shorter than a novel, it can be a little overwhelming. And so we're going to talk about process and things you can do to make editing it for publication easier. And also we're going to talk about scene structure between the brainstorming and the actual writing. We're going to talk about scene structure and how to set up your scenes so that they're a lot easier to write.
Excellent. I can't wait to get started with that. It's so exciting, really. I've never heard about a course like that before.
Well, I've never done it before. I think it's going to be a blast, though.
Yeah, I think so, too. Okay, thank you very much for joining me here today, Lynn. It was a pleasure, and I'm really looking forward to yours and Ryan's product here.
Oh, thanks for having me. It was great talking with you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.